The Mandela Revolution, a leader's journey towards freedom. Mandela was born on July 18, 1918 in the village of Mbizo in Umtata, then part of South Africa's Cape Province. Given the forename Ralilola, a Xhosa term colloquially meaning troublemaker, in later years he became known by his clan name, Madiba. His patrilineal great-grandfather, Ngubengcuka, was ruler of the Thembu Kingdom in the Transkeian territories of South Africa's modern Eastern Cape Province. One of Ngubengcuka's sons, named Mandela, was Nelson's grandfather and the source of his surname. Because Mandela was the king's child by a wife of the Xiba clan, a so-called left-hand house, the descendants of his cadet branch of the royal family were morganatic, ineligible to inherit the throne but recognized as hereditary royal councillors. Nelson Mandela's father, Gadla Henrimfakani Iswa Mandela, 1880–1928, was a local chief and councillor to the monarch. He was appointed to the position in 1915, after his predecessor was accused of corruption by a governing white magistrate. In 1926, Gadla was also sacked for corruption, but Nelson was told that his father had lost his job for standing up to the magistrate's unreasonable demands. A devotee of the god Kamada, Gadla was a polygamist with 4 wives, 4 sons and 9 daughters, who lived in different villages. Nelson's mother was Gadla's 3rd wife, Nosakini Fanny, daughter of Nketema of the right-hand house and a member of the Amane Pembu clan of the Xhosa. Mandela later stated that his early life was dominated by traditional Xhosa custom and taboo. He grew up with 2 sisters in his mother's kraal in the village of Kunu, where he tended herds as a cattle boy and spent much time outside with other boys. Both his parents were illiterate, but his mother, being a devout Christian, sent him to a local Methodist school when he was about 7. Baptized a Methodist, Mandela was given the English forename of Nelson by his teacher. When Mandela was about 9, his father came to stay at Kunu, where he died of an undiagnosed ailment that Mandela believed to be lung disease. Feeling cut adrift, he later said that he inherited his father's proud rebelliousness and stubborn sense of fairness. Mandela's mother took him to the Great Place Palace at Nkekazwini, where he was entrusted to the guardianship of the Thembu regent, Chief Janjantaba Dalindibo. Although he did not see his mother again for many years, Mandela felt that Janjantaba and his wife Noengland treated him as their own child, raising him alongside their children. As Mandela attended church services every Sunday with his guardians, Christianity became a significant part of his life. He attended a Methodist mission school located next to the palace, where he studied English, Xhosa, history, and geography. He developed a love of African history, listening to the tales told by elderly visitors to the palace, and was influenced by the anti-imperialist rhetoric of a visiting chief, Joy. Nevertheless, at the time he considered the European colonizers not as oppressors but as benefactors who had brought education and other benefits to southern Africa. Aged 16, he, Justice and several other boys traveled to Taihalara to undergo the Owoluko circumcision ritual that symbolically marked their transition from boys to men. Afterwards he was given the name Dalibunga. Intending to gain skills needed to become a privy councillor for the Thembu royal house, Mandela began his secondary education in 1933 at Clarkberry Methodist High School in Nkobo, a Western-style institution that was the largest school for black Africans in Thembuland. Made to socialize with other students on an equal basis, he claimed that he lost his stuck-up attitude, becoming best friends with a girl for the first time. He began playing sports and developed his lifelong love of gardening. He completed his junior certificate in 2 years, and in 1937 he moved to Helltown, the Methodist college in Fort Beaufort attended by most Thembu royalty, including Justice. The headmaster emphasized the superiority of European culture and government, but Mandela became increasingly interested in native African culture, making his first non-Xhosa friend, a speaker of Sotho, and coming under the influence of one of his favorite teachers, a Xhosa who broke taboo by marrying a Sotho. Mandela spent much of his spare time at Helltown as a long-distance runner and boxer, and in his second year he became a prefect. In 1939, with Janjantaba's backing, Mandela began work on a BA degree at the University of Fort Hare, an elite black institution of approximately 150 students in Alice, Eastern Cape. He studied English, anthropology, politics, native administration, and Roman Dutch law in his first year, desiring to become an interpreter or clerk in the Native Affairs Department. Mandela stayed in the Wesley House dormitory, befriending his own kinsman, K.D. Matanzima, as well as Oliver Tambo, who became a close friend and comrade for decades to come. He took up ballroom dancing, performed in a drama society play about Abraham Lincoln, and gave Bible classes in the local community as part of the Student Christian Association. Although he had friends who held connections to the African National Congress, ANC, who wanted South Africa to be independent of the British Empire, Mandela avoided any involvement with the nascent movement, and became a vocal supporter of the British war effort when the Second World War broke out. At the end of his first year he became involved in a Students' Representative Council, SRC, boycott against the quality of food, for which he was suspended from the university. He never returned to complete his degree. Mandela began studying law at the University of the Witwatersrand, where he was the only black African student and faced racism. There, he befriended liberal and communist European, Jewish and Indian students, among them Joe Slovo and Ruth First. Becoming increasingly politicized, Mandela marched in August 1943 in support of a successful bus boycott to reverse fare rises. Joining the ANC, he was increasingly influenced by Sisulu, spending time with other activists at Sisulu's Orlando house, including his old friend Oliver Tambo. In 1943, Mandela met Anton Lembede, an ANC member affiliated with the Africanist branch of African nationalism, which was virulently opposed to a racially united front against colonialism and imperialism or to an alliance with the communists. Despite his friendships with non-blacks and communists, Mandela embraced Lembede's views, believing that black Africans should be entirely independent in their struggle for political self-determination. Deciding on the need for a youth wing to mass mobilize Africans in opposition to their subjugation, Mandela was among a delegation that approached ANC President Alfred Bitini Xuma on the subject at his home in Sophiatown. The African National Congress Youth League, ANCYL, was founded on Easter Sunday 1944 in the Bantu Men's Social Center, with Lembede as president and Mandela as a member of its executive committee. In the South African general election in 1948, in which only whites were permitted to vote, the Afrikaner-dominated Herenigde Nasionale Party under Daniel Francois Malan took power, soon uniting with the Afrikaner Party to form the National Party. Openly racialist, the party codified and expanded racial segregation with new apartheid legislation. Gaining increasing influence in the ANC, Mandela and his party cadre allies began advocating direct action against apartheid, such as boycotts and strikes, influenced by the tactics already employed by South Africa's Indian community. Xuma did not support these measures and was removed from the presidency in a vote of no confidence, replaced by James Moroka and a more militant executive committee containing Sisulu, MDA, Tambo and Godfrey Pitch. Mandela later related that he and his colleagues had guided the ANC to a more radical and revolutionary path. Having devoted his time to politics, Mandela failed his final year at Witwatersrand 3 times. He was ultimately denied his degree in December 1949. Mandela took Xuma's place on the ANC National Executive in March 1950, and that same year was elected national president of the ANCYL. In March, the Defend Free Speech Convention was held in Johannesburg, bringing together African, Indian and communist activists to call a May Day general strike in protest against apartheid and white minority rule. Mandela opposed the strike because it was multiracial and not ANC-led, but a majority of black workers took part, resulting in increased police repression and the introduction of the Suppression of Communism Act, 1950, affecting the actions of all protest groups. At the ANC National Conference of December 1951, he continued arguing against a racially united front, but was outvoted. Thereafter, Mandela rejected Lembede's Africanism and embraced the idea of a multiracial front against apartheid. In 1952, the ANC began preparation for a joint defiance campaign against apartheid with Indian and communist groups, founding a national voluntary board to recruit volunteers. The campaign was designed to follow the path of nonviolent resistance influenced by Mahatma Gandhi. Some supported this for ethical reasons, but Mandela instead considered it pragmatic. At a Durban rally on June 22, Mandela addressed an assembled crowd of 10,000 people, initiating the campaign protests for which he was arrested and briefly interned in Marshall Square Prison. These events established Mandela as one of the best-known black political figures in South Africa. With further protests, the ANC's membership grew from 20,000 to 100,000 members. The government responded with mass arrests and introduced the Public Safety Act, 1953 to permit martial law. In May, authorities banned Transvaal ANC President J.B. Marks from making public appearances. Unable to maintain his position, he recommended Mandela as his successor. Although Africanists opposed his candidacy, Mandela was elected to be regional president in October. In July 1952, Mandela was arrested under the Suppression of Communism Act and stood trial as one of the 21 accused, among them Moroka, Sisulu, and Yusuf Dadoo, in Johannesburg. Found guilty of statutory communism, a term that the government used to describe most opposition to apartheid, their sentence of 9 months hard labor was suspended for 2 years. 84. In December, Mandela was given a 6-month ban from attending meetings or talking to more than one individual at a time, making his Transvaal ANC presidency impractical, and during this period the Defiance campaign petered out. Mandela obtained work as an attorney for the firm Terblanche and Briggish, before moving to the liberal-run Helman and Michel, passing qualification exams to become a full-fledged attorney. In August 1953, Mandela and Tambo opened their own law firm, Mandela and Tambo, operating in downtown Johannesburg. The only African-run law firm in the country, it was popular with aggrieved black people, often dealing with cases of police brutality. Disliked by the authorities, the firm was forced to relocate to a remote location after their office permit was removed under the Group Areas Act. As a result, their clientele dwindled. After taking part in the unsuccessful protest to prevent the forced relocation of all black people from the Sophiatown suburb of Johannesburg in February 1955, Mandela concluded that violent action would prove necessary to end apartheid and white minority rule. Following the end of a second ban in September 1955, Mandela went on a working holiday to Transkei to discuss the implications of the Bantu Authorities Act, 1951 with local Xhosa chiefs, also visiting his mother in Noengland before proceeding to Cape Town. In March 1956, he received his third ban on public appearances, restricting him to Johannesburg for 5 years, but he often defied it. In December 1956, Mandela was arrested alongside most of the ANC national executive and accused of high treason against the state. Held in Johannesburg prison amid mass protests, they underwent a preparatory examination before being granted bail. The defense's refutation began in January 1957, overseen by defense lawyer Vernon Barange, and continued until the case was adjourned in September. In January 1958, Oswald Piro was appointed to prosecute the case, and in February the judge ruled that there was sufficient reason for the defendants to go on trial in the Transvaal Supreme Court. The formal treason trial began in Pretoria in August 1958, with the defendants successfully applying to have the 3 judges, all linked to the governing National Party, replaced. In August, one charge was dropped, and in October the prosecution withdrew its indictment, submitting a reformulated version in November which argued that the ANC leadership committed high treason by advocating violent revolution, a charge the defendants denied. In April 1959, Africanists dissatisfied with the ANC's United Front approach founded the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC. Mandela disagreed with the PAC's racially exclusionary views, describing them as immature and naive. Both parties took part in an anti-pass campaign in early 1960, in which Africans burned the passes that they were legally obliged to carry. One of the PAC-organized demonstrations was fired upon by police, resulting in the deaths of 69 protesters in the Sharpeville massacre. The incident brought international condemnation of the government and resulted in rioting throughout South Africa, with Mandela publicly burning his pass in solidarity. Responding to the unrest, the government implemented state of emergency measures, declaring martial law and banning the ANC and PAC. In March, they arrested Mandela and other activists, imprisoning them for 5 months without charge in the unsanitary conditions of the Pretoria local prison. Imprisonment caused problems for Mandela and his co-defendants in the treason trial. Their lawyers could not reach them, and so it was decided that the lawyers would withdraw in protest until the accused were freed from prison when the state of emergency was lifted in late August 1960. Over the following months, Mandela used his free time to organize an all-in African conference near Pietermaritzburg, Natal, in March 1961, at which 1,400 anti-apartheid delegates met, agreeing on a stay-at-home strike to mark May 31, the day South Africa became a republic. On March 29, 1961, 6 years after the treason trial began, the judges produced a verdict of not guilty, ruling that there was insufficient evidence to convict the accused of high treason, since they had advocated neither communism nor violent revolution. The outcome embarrassed the government. Disguised as a chauffeur, Mandela traveled around the country incognito, organizing the ANC's new cell structure and the planned mass stay-at-home strike. Referred to as the Black Pimpernel in the press, a reference to Emma Orczy's 1905 novel The Scarlet Pimpernel, a warrant for his arrest was put out by the police. Mandela held secret meetings with reporters, and after the government failed to prevent the strike, he warned them that many anti-apartheid activists would soon resort to violence through groups like the Pax Poco. He believed that the ANC should form an armed group to channel some of this violence in a controlled direction, convincing both ANC leader Albert Luthuli, who was morally opposed to violence, and allied activist groups of its necessity. Inspired by the actions of Fidel Castro's 26th of July movement in the Cuban Revolution, in 1961 Mandela, Sisulu and Slovo co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, abbreviated MK. Becoming chairman of the militant group, Mandela gained ideas from literature on guerrilla warfare by Marxist militants Mao and Che Guevara as well as from the military theorist Karl von Clausewitz. The ANC decided to send Mandela as a delegate to the February 1962 meeting of the Pan-African Freedom Movement for East, Central and Southern Africa, PAFMEXA, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Leaving South Africa in secret via Bechuanaland, on his way Mandela visited Tanganyika and met with its president, Julius Nyerere. Arriving in Ethiopia, Mandela met with Emperor Haile Selassie I, and gave his speech after Selassie's at the conference. After the symposium, he traveled to Cairo, Egypt, admiring the political reforms of President Gamal Abdel Nasser, and in April 1962 he went to Morocco where asked El Khatib to meet the king to ask him to give him £5,000. The next day he got the £5,000 along with some weapons and training to Mandela's soldier, and then went to Tunis, Tunisia, where President Habib Bourguiba gave him £5,000 for weaponry. He proceeded to Morocco, Mali, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia and Senegal, receiving funds from Liberian President William Tubman and Guinean President Ahmed Sékou Touré. He left Africa for London, England, where he met anti-apartheid activists, reporters and prominent politicians. Upon returning to Ethiopia, he began a 6-month course in guerrilla warfare, but completed only 2 months before being recalled to South Africa by the ANC's leadership. On August 5, 1962, police captured Mandela along with fellow activist Cecil Williams near Howick. Many MK members suspected that the authorities had been tipped off with regard to Mandela's whereabouts, although Mandela himself gave these ideas little credence. In later years, Donald Rickard, a former American diplomat, revealed that the Central Intelligence Agency, which feared Mandela's associations with communists, had informed the South African police of his location. Jailed in Johannesburg's Marshall Square prison, Mandela was charged with inciting workers' strikes and leaving the country without permission. Representing himself with Slovo as legal advisor, Mandela intended to use the trial to showcase the ANC's moral opposition to racism, while supporters demonstrated outside the court. His hearing began in October, but he disrupted proceedings by wearing a traditional kaross, refusing to call any witnesses, and turning his plea of mitigation into a political speech. Found guilty, he was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. As he left the courtroom, supporters sang Nkosi Sikloli Africa. July 11, 1963, police raided Lily's Leaf Farm, arresting those that they found there and uncovering paperwork documenting MK's activities, some of which mentioned Mandela. The Rivonia trial began at Pretoria Supreme Court in October, with Mandela and his comrades charged with 4 counts of sabotage and conspiracy to violently overthrow the government. Their chief prosecutor was Percy Yutter. Judge Quartus de Wet soon threw out the prosecution's case for insufficient evidence, but Yutter reformulated the charges, presenting his new case from December 1963 until February 1964, calling 173 witnesses and bringing thousands of documents and photographs to the trial. Although 4 of the accused denied involvement with MK, Mandela and the other 5 accused admitted sabotage but denied that they had ever agreed to initiate guerrilla war against the government. They used the trial to highlight their political cause. At the opening of the defense's proceedings, Mandela gave his 3-hour "I am prepared to die" speech. That speech, which was inspired by Castro's "History will absolve me," was widely reported in the press despite official censorship. The trial gained international attention. There were global calls for the release of the accused from the United Nations and World Peace Council, while the University of London Union voted Mandela to its presidency. On June 12, 1964, Justice de Wet found Mandela and 2 of his co-accused guilty on all 4 charges. Although the prosecution had called for the death sentence to be applied, the judge instead condemned them to life imprisonment. In 1964, Mandela and his co-accused were transferred from Pretoria to the prison on Robben Island, remaining there for the next 18 years. Isolated from non-political prisoners in Section B, Mandela was imprisoned in a damp concrete cell measuring 8 feet (2.4 meters) by 7 feet (2.1 meters), with a straw mat on which to sleep. Verbally and physically harassed by several white prison wardens, the Rivonia trial prisoners spent their days breaking rocks into gravel, until being reassigned in January 1965 to work in a lime quarry. Mandela was initially forbidden to wear sunglasses, and the glare from the lime permanently damaged his eyesight. At night, he worked on his LLB degree, which he was obtaining from the University of London through a correspondence course with Wolsey Hall, Oxford, but newspapers were forbidden, and he was locked in solitary confinement on several occasions for the possession of smuggled news clippings. He was initially classified as the lowest grade of prisoner, Class D, meaning that he was permitted 1 visit and 1 letter every 6 months, although all mail was heavily censored. His mother visited in 1968, dying shortly after, and his firstborn son Thembi died in a car accident the following year. Mandela was forbidden from attending either funeral. His wife was rarely able to see him, being regularly imprisoned for political activity, and his daughters first visited in December 1975. From 1967 onwards, prison conditions improved. Black prisoners were given trousers rather than shorts, games were permitted, and the standard of their food was raised. In 1969, an escape plan for Mandela was developed by Gordon Bruce, but it was abandoned after the conspiracy was infiltrated by an agent of the South African Bureau of State Security, BOSS, who hoped to see Mandela shot during the escape. By 1975, Mandela had become a Class A prisoner, which allowed him greater numbers of visits and letters. He corresponded with anti-apartheid activists like Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Desmond Tutu. That year, he began his autobiography, which was smuggled to London, but remained unpublished at the time. Prison authorities discovered several pages, and his LLB study privileges were revoked for 4 years. Instead, he devoted his spare time to gardening and reading until the authorities permitted him to resume his LLB degree studies in 1980. Renewed international interest in his plight came in July 1978, when he celebrated his 60th birthday. He was awarded an honorary doctorate in Lesotho, the Jawaharlal Nehru Award for International Understanding in India in 1979, and the Freedom of the City of Glasgow, Scotland in 1981. In March 1980, the slogan, "Free Mandela," was developed by journalist Percy Kaboza, sparking an international campaign that led the UN Security Council to call for his release. Despite increasing foreign pressure, the government refused, relying on its Cold War allies US President Ronald Reagan and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, both considered Mandela's ANC a terrorist organization sympathetic to communism and supported its suppression. Mandela's 70th birthday in July 1988 attracted international attention, including a tribute concert at London's Wembley Stadium that was televised and watched by an estimated 200 million viewers. Recovering from tuberculosis exacerbated by the damp conditions in his cell, Mandela was moved to Victor Verster Prison, near Paarl, in December 1988. He was housed in the relative comfort of a warder's house with a personal cook, and he used the time to complete his LLB degree. While there, he was permitted many visitors and organized secret communications with exiled ANC leader Oliver Tambo. Leaving Victor Verster Prison on February 11, Mandela held Winnie's hand in front of amassed crowds and the press. The event was broadcast live across the world. Mandela proceeded on an African tour, meeting supporters and politicians in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Libya and Algeria, and continuing to Sweden, where he was reunited with Tambo, and London, where he appeared at the Nelson Mandela, an international tribute for a Free South Africa concert at Wembley Stadium. In May 1990, Mandela led a multiracial ANC delegation into preliminary negotiations with a government delegation of 11 Afrikaner men. Mandela impressed them with his discussions of Afrikaner history, and the negotiations led to the Groot Schuur Minute, in which the government lifted the state of emergency. In August, Mandela, recognizing the ANC's severe military disadvantage, offered a ceasefire, the Pretoria Minute, for which he was widely criticized by MK activists. He spent much time trying to unify and build the ANC, appearing at a Johannesburg conference in December attended by 1,600 delegates, many of whom found him more moderate than expected. With the election set for April 27, 1994, the ANC began campaigning, opening 100 election offices and orchestrating people's forums across the country at which Mandela could appear as a popular figure with great status among black South Africans. The election went ahead with little violence, although an AWB cell killed 20 with car bombs. As widely expected, the ANC won a sweeping victory, taking 63% of the vote, just short of the two-thirds majority needed to unilaterally change the constitution. The newly elected National Assembly's first act was to formally elect Mandela as South Africa's first black chief executive. His inauguration took place in Pretoria on May 10, 1994, televised to 1 billion viewers globally. In December 1994, Mandela published Long Walk to Freedom, an autobiography based around a manuscript he had written in prison, augmented by interviews conducted with American journalist Richard Stengel. In late 1994, he attended the 49th conference of the ANC in Bloemfontein, at which a more militant national executive was elected, among them Winnie Mandela. Although she expressed an interest in reconciling, Nelson initiated divorce proceedings in August 1995. Presiding over the transition from apartheid minority rule to a multicultural democracy, Mandela saw national reconciliation as the primary task of his presidency. Having seen other post-colonial African economies damaged by the departure of white elites, Mandela worked to reassure South Africa's white population that they were protected and represented in the Rainbow Nation. Although his government of national unity would be dominated by the ANC, he attempted to create a broad coalition by appointing de Klerk as deputy president and appointing other National Party officials as ministers for agriculture, environment, and minerals and energy, as well as naming Buthelezi as Minister for Home Affairs. Mandela oversaw the formation of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate crimes committed under apartheid by both the government and the ANC, appointing Tutu as its chair. To prevent the creation of martyrs, the commission granted individual amnesties in exchange for testimony of crimes committed during the apartheid era. Dedicated in February 1996, it held 2 years of hearings detailing rapes, torture, bombings and assassinations before issuing its final report in October 1998. Both de Klerk and Mbeki appealed to have parts of the report suppressed, though only de Klerk's appeal was successful. Mandela praised the commission's work, stating that it had helped us move away from the past to concentrate on the present and the future. Mandela expressed the view that South Africa's future foreign relations should be based on our belief that human rights should be the core of international relations. Following the South African example, Mandela encouraged other nations to resolve conflicts through diplomacy and reconciliation. Inspired by the region's economic boom, Mandela sought greater economic relations with East Asia, in particular with Malaysia, although this was prevented by the 1997 Asian financial crisis. He extended diplomatic recognition to the People's Republic of China, PRC, who were growing as an economic force, and initially also to Taiwan, who were already long-standing investors in the South African economy. However, under pressure from the PRC, he cut recognition of Taiwan in November 1996, and he paid an official visit to Beijing in May 1999. Mandela stepped down as ANC president at the party's December 1997 conference. He hoped that Ramaphosa would succeed him, believing Mbeki to be too inflexible and intolerant of criticism, but the ANC elected Mbeki regardless. Retiring in June 1999, Mandela aimed to lead a quiet family life, divided between Johannesburg and Kunu. Although he set about authoring a sequel to his first autobiography, to be titled The Presidential Years, it remained unfinished and was only published posthumously in 2017. In 2002, Mandela inaugurated the Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, and in 2003 the Mandela Rhodes Foundation was created at Rhodes House, University of Oxford, to provide postgraduate scholarships to African students. These projects were followed by the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory and the 46664 campaign against HIV/AIDS. He gave the closing address at the 13th International AIDS Conference in Durban in 2000, and in 2004, spoke at the 15th International AIDS Conference in Bangkok, Thailand, calling for greater measures to tackle tuberculosis as well as HIV/AIDS. Mandela publicized AIDS as the cause of his son Makatho's death in January 2005, to defy the stigma about discussing the disease. Publicly, Mandela became more vocal in criticizing Western powers. He strongly opposed the 1999 NATO intervention in Kosovo and called it an attempt by the world's powerful nations to police the entire world. In 2003, he spoke out against the plans for the United States to launch a war in Iraq, describing it as a tragedy, and lambasting U.S. President George W. Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair, whom he referred to as an American foreign minister, for undermining the UN, saying, "All that, Mr. Bush, wants is Iraqi oil." He attacked the United States more generally, asserting that, if there is a country that has committed unspeakable atrocities in the world, it is the United States of America, citing the atomic bombing of Japan. This attracted international controversy, although he later improved his relationship with Bush. In June 2004, aged 85 and amid failing health, Mandela announced that he was retiring from retirement and retreating from public life, remarking, "Don't call me, I will call you." Although continuing to meet with close friends and family, the foundation discouraged invitations for him to appear at public events and denied most interview requests. He retained some involvement in international affairs. In 2005, he founded the Nelson Mandela Legacy Trust, traveling to the United States to speak before the Brookings Institution and the NAACP on the need for economic assistance to Africa. Mandela announced the formation of this new group, the Elders, in a speech delivered on his 89th birthday. Mandela's 90th birthday was marked across the country on July 18, 2008. A tribute concert was held in Hyde Park, London. In 2004, Mandela successfully campaigned for South Africa to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup, declaring that there would be few better gifts for us, in the year marking a decade since the fall of apartheid. Despite maintaining a low profile during the event due to ill health, Mandela made his final public appearance during the World Cup closing ceremony, where he received much applause. At Sisulu's house, Mandela met Evelyn Mays, a trainee nurse and ANC activist from Nkobo, Transkei. Entering a relationship and marrying in October 1944, they initially lived with her relatives until moving into a rented house in the township of Orlando in early 1946. Their first child, Madiba Thembai Thembekile, was born in February 1945, a daughter, Makaziwe, was born in 1947 but died of meningitis 9 months later. Mandela's marriage broke down and Evelyn left him, taking their children to live with her brother. Initiating divorce proceedings in May 1956, she claimed that Mandela had physically abused her. He denied the allegations and fought for custody of their children. She withdrew her petition of separation in November, but Mandela filed for divorce in January 1958. The divorce was finalized in March, with the children placed in Evelyn's care. During the divorce proceedings, he began courting a social worker, Winnie Madikizela, whom he married in Bizana in June 1958. She later became involved in ANC activities, spending several weeks in prison. Together they had 2 children, Zenani, born in February 1959, and Zinziswa, 1960–2020. Their marriage was increasingly strained as he learned of her affair with Dolly Mpofu, but he supported her during her trial for kidnapping and assault. He gained funding for her defense from the International Defense and Aid Fund for Southern Africa and from Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, but, in June 1991, she was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison, reduced to 2 on appeal. On April 13, 1992, Mandela publicly announced his separation from Winnie. In late 1994, he attended the 49th conference of the ANC in Bloemfontein, at which a more militant national executive was elected, among them Winnie Mandela. Although she expressed an interest in reconciling, Nelson initiated divorce proceedings in August 1995. By 1995, he had entered into a relationship with Graca Machel, a Mozambican political activist 27 years his junior who was the widow of former President Samora Machel. They had first met in July 1990 when she was still in mourning, but their friendship grew into a partnership, with Machel accompanying him on many of his foreign visits. She turned down Mandela's first marriage proposal, wanting to retain some independence and dividing her time between Mozambique and Johannesburg. Mandela's relationship with Machel had intensified. In February 1998, he publicly stated that he was in love with a remarkable lady, and under pressure from Tutu, who urged him to set an example for young people, he organized a wedding for his 80th birthday, in July that year. In February 2011, Mandela was briefly hospitalized with a respiratory infection, attracting international attention, before being readmitted for a lung infection and gallstone removal in December 2012. After a successful medical procedure in early March 2013, his lung infection recurred and he was briefly hospitalized in Pretoria. In June 2013, his lung infection worsened and he was readmitted to a Pretoria hospital in serious condition. The Archbishop of Cape Town Thabo Makgoba visited Mandela at the hospital and prayed with Machel, while Zuma cancelled a trip to Mozambique to visit him the following day. In September 2013, Mandela was discharged from hospital, although his condition remained unstable. After suffering from a prolonged respiratory infection, Mandela died on December 5, 2013 at the age of 95, at around 2050 local time at his home in Houghton, surrounded by his family. Zuma publicly announced his death on television, proclaiming 10 days of national mourning, a memorial service held at Johannesburg's FNB Stadium on December 10, 2013, and December 8 as a national day of prayer and reflection. Mandela's body lay in state from 11 to December 13 at the Union Buildings in Pretoria and a state funeral was held on December 15 in Kunu. Approximately 90 representatives of foreign states traveled to South Africa to attend memorial events. It was later revealed that 300 million rand, about $20 million, originally earmarked for humanitarian development projects had been redirected to finance the funeral. The media was awash with tributes and reminiscences, while images of tributes to Mandela proliferated across social media. His $4.1 million estate was left to his widow, other family members, staff, and educational institutions. Nelson Mandela's lifestyle embodies resilience, forgiveness, and unwavering commitment to justice. Despite enduring 27 years in prison, he emerged with a spirit unbroken, advocating reconciliation over revenge. His ability to bridge divides and lead with compassion serves as a beacon for those facing oppression and injustice worldwide. Mandela's humility, integrity, and dedication to equality inspire individuals to challenge injustice, foster unity, and strive for positive change. His legacy reminds us that even in the face of adversity, one person's unwavering belief in humanity's potential can ignite transformative movements and shape a better world for generations to come. Do well to follow, comment, like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notification to encourage us publish more contents like this. From all of us at Didactic Contents, we love you all.